There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey everybody, this is David Wilms. This is the Your Mountain podcast. We are broadcasting from Studio 1A.
Yeah, that's right.
Studio 1A, a.k.a. Mike's basement.
That's right.
Don't tell people where it is.
I didn't give the address. Mike, how are you doing?
Never been better.
Yeah.
And you?
I've been better.
Have you?
My place just got destroyed by a hailstorm.
Yeah, my place is a stone's throw away, and I did not have a problem.
Unbelievable.
I got hail.
You're a hail magnet.
Every year.
The hail came down at an angle and actually cut the grass, and I found grass clippings all over the driveway.
So you didn't have to do that.
It's the damnedest thing.
I found my garden all over the driveway.
Yeah.
And the backyard. And floating on an iceberg. Not iceberg lettuce, floating on an iceberg down the street.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It was little hail, right?
Yeah, just lots and lots and
Yeah,
lots
it's like
and lots.
sandblasting.
Yeah, thank your lucky stars.
You didn't get any, did you, Nephi?
No, I actually got my house, and then I was out driving around and pulled into the parking garage across from the old office there, like literally right when it started. And I took my little boys out, and we just sat there and watched it. It was awesome.
You know, we have a retention pond in our neighborhood, and normally after storms like this, you might go out there and find people kayaking on it or on a canoe on it. This time, there were so many icebergs floating around, I think it would have been a hazard.
It's crazy.
Yeah, right.
It was unbelievable. Anyway, I'm glad we're able to get together. Today, we are going to follow up on our discussion on the Endangered Species Act. So we did part one a couple weeks ago. We talked about the history of the Endangered Species Act, why we have it, and what kind of amendments have occurred over the years, how the courts have interpreted it and how that interpretation has really changed the application of the act. Today, we're going to wonk out a little bit because we're going to talk about part two here.
Because if the first one wasn't wonky enough for you.
Wasn't wonky enough. Get ready.
You're in luck.
Buckle up. Because we're going to talk about how does the Endangered Species Act work? How does it operate?
You guys did a great job in that last one. Absent adult supervision. It was well done. In fact,
I appreciate that.
Here's the decision I came to. I'm going to steal Mike from you, and I'm going to become Mike's hunter mentor. He was fantastic in the last podcast, and I think by next year, I'm going to have Mike hunting with from thousands of yards with an AR platform rifle and suppressors. I am now his hunter mentor.
I don't know how you got that out of the last episode, but
I just decided, I want it. It's like
So I get to hunt twice as much? Is that what I'm hearing?
I just figured,
at least from twice as far.
I'm just a new fan of Mike McGrady.
100 yards?
Yeah, fair enough.
It was good. No, you guys did a fantastic job.
Thanks. Well, we'll try not to mess it up now that you're back.
Yeah.
But we're gonna.
I'll
defense,
be no help.
I don't necessarily need a hunter mentor on how to shoot and go. I just needed to know where to go in Wyoming, having grown up in Florida.
That's different.
It's a very different.
There's a lot of
Mike,
different contours here.
I share hunting spots.
Okay,
I believe I shared some.
that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Now,
let's go.
Now let's wonk out.
Okay.
So we actually decided after the last breakdown or dissection of this ESA, we decided we need to do more than 2 parts. We actually last time said we're going to do 2 parts. We're going to do 3 parts. So today we're going to talk about how does the act work mechanically? Like how does listing and delisting work? That sort of thing. Next time for part 3, the next ESA installment, we're going to talk about what is Congress looking at doing, what is the administration looking at doing regulatorily. So we'll look at the regulatory and statutory proposals, what they do, and we'll kind of say why they're doing that, why they're making those proposals, and talk about a little bit about the likelihood of success. Yep. But today, it's all about how it works.
And in all seriousness, you two, all respect, and so everybody knows, these guys, as we said, sitting here, you're two of the top guys I know anywhere at this stuff. And so the challenge for you guys, as I said, looking at me, is I'm not exactly bad at swimming in this arena, but I'm not an ESA guy. I'm a policy wonk, though. So I said, Dave, if you're drowning me, consider me your canary in the coal mine.
That's why we needed canaries aren't endangered, are they?
Well,
that's why we needed you back to rein us in if we start going down this rabbit hole here.
It was really good. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be a learning child here.
Well, buckle up, because here we go. Endangered Species Act has two purposes. Let's get that out of the way right away. Because a lot of folks, you hear, and you read about the Endangered Species Act is meant to prevent extinction, right? That's what you hear about. And it's in all kinds of media reports. You see stories saying the Endangered Species Act has prevented these species from going extinct.
90% or whatever the number.
99%
haven't gone extinct once they go on the list.
Right. But there's a big piece that's forgotten by a lot of folks. There's a second purpose of the act.
Yep.
And it's actually not laid out. Ironically enough, it's not laid out in the purposes section of the act. So there's a purposes section. It's not in there. It's actually in the definition. So the purpose of the act, under that, it's to provide a program for the conservation of endangered species and threatened species and the ecosystems upon which they depend. So the habitat as well, right? The definition section defines conservation, right? And it's using all the methods and procedures that are necessary to bring a species back, threatened or endangered, back to the point which the act no longer needs to apply.
Yep, and you just hit it right there.
Recovery. So part 1, prevent extinction. Part 2,
bring it back.
Recover it, get them delisted.
Yep.
And move on to other things. So get that out of the way, right? So how does a species go about being listed? Or at least, what is the process for consideration? Right? Yep. And this is all in Section 4, which has, it's really I call it the operative provision of the act. It's how listing occurs and how delisting occurs.
Yep, we're telling you, this is the section that tells you how you're getting them on, how you're getting them off.
You got it. So, first of all, there are two ways that a species can get put on the list. Right? First, and when I say the service, we're going to talk about the service a lot. When I say the service, just assume I'm talking about both the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries, National Oceanic
Atmospheric Administration.
Yeah. Assume I'm talking about both, because they both have responsibilities under the Act to administer the Act for different species. NOAA deals with species that are seabound marine species and salmon, interestingly enough, because it spends most of its life actually in the ocean.
Right? If you really want to get wonky, though, you have to understand that the Act talks about the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Commerce have the responsibility to administer this. They just have each delegated that down to an agency.
Yep. So that is pretty wonky, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk, for purposes of this, we're just going to say service. Mm-hmm. And we're just assume that we're talking about Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries. But mostly we're going to probably be talking about Fish and Wildlife Service. Let's be honest. That's what we know and what we work with. Mm-hmm. Right? So, two ways. They do it on their own accord. Some examples of that. Whooping crane, bald eagle, black-footed ferret, grizzly bears.
All totem animals to me.
Gray wolves. Totem animals.
Yeah, they're all my spirit. Like, I have the totem. Like, they bless me.
Okay. Okay.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah.
It's a good thing you're back.
Yeah, welcome back, Nephi.
I'm sorry.
So they can do that. And those are some examples of species where they just said, we got to do this. Now, there's a process they have to go through, and we'll talk about that. But the other way is any person, and person is anybody, you, me, a business, an organization, they're considered people. Any person can petition the Fish and Wildlife Service to have a species listed. So those are the two ways of doing it. That's it. you have to work through those processes. Am I missing something? I don't think I'm missing anything.
I can't think of anything. I mean, I assume you're going to get to the 5 factors that they analyze.
Yeah.
So important, and I don't know how wonky we're going to get in the future, but recognize these are the methodologies through the Act, and then other things are going to leverage those 2 different ways that stuff can get on and off the list in the future. So while the Act has these clean doors for getting on and off, those 2 clean doors, other stuff comes into play.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you'll hear people ban around the idea of a judicial listing where a court forces the agency to list the species. That's not actually how it works. The agency has to make that decision on their own. They're an independent body.
It forces the agency to go back and reanalyze their prior decision with the benefit of now more information. Right. That's really when you say have a court saying the court delisted or the court listed a species, that's not really how it works. The court is directing the agency to redo its analysis, pointing at a potential outcome, right? But it has to go through the process that's laid out in the Act and in the Administrative Procedures Act, which is we're not even going to get into that.
Yeah.
That's wonking out to a completely different degree. We're not going to do that. Anyway, so we have these 2 methods, right? So let's take for the purposes of this discussion, we're not going to talk about the service on its own accord listing. I think it'll be easier, and I think more people will relate to somebody submits a petition.
Right.
What happens?
It's one of the more common occurrences these days.
Yeah. And when the Act was originally enacted, most of the species on that original list were put there by the services.
Right.
But as we've moved through over the years, frankly, the agency's resources are spread so thin on administering the Act that they don't really have the time to go out and do all the data collection and get out in front and make those determinations themselves. They have to be prompted by a petition.
Yeah, third parties are bringing these species to the doorstep for the service. So you make a decision.
A lot of them to the doorstep.
Yep.
I mean, let's be clear. There are times when the agency will receive 100 to 400 petitions at a time to list individual species. And so anyway,
they can only get through a handful in a given year.
Right, because of what we're about to talk about, what they have to do from a process standpoint. So, Mike, you want to touch on that also? They get a petition, and I'm putting you on the spot, or I can do it, whatever.
Well, you've got it in front of you. Go for it.
I don't have it all in front of me.
Dave has notes on a laptop. He looks across at Mike, who can't see anything. He's like, "Hey, Mike, let me quiz you on this.
Look, I have
Let's see if you can do this thing."
So I teach
cold that I've got, that I've been teaching a class about. Oh, and I'm looking at my slides.
Yeah, so I teach a class on this, and I thought, it might be just so I stay on track. It might be easier if I just have the notes from the class I teach in front of me.
Go, Mike.
So it's true.
Yeah.
But let's put it on Mike. What do you? I actually don't have that slide up. So petition is submitted, and a petition can be anywhere from. I've seen petitions that you can write it on a napkin. Right. Anybody can write a petition. You could write a petition on a napkin on 3x5 note cards. Probably not going to go anywhere. But then you have petitions that are several hundred pages long and contain reams of supplemental material of scientific data and research.
So, time out for clarity's sake, just so people understand. This is not like a petition like you're petitioning to get your best friend on the ballot at the high school. So it's not a popularity contest. We're taking a bunch of whole people to do this, and it's a different, same word, different type of petition.
Yeah, right. No, this is a very detailed.
It's not a popularity contest.
A very detailed analysis to walk through all the various factors, explaining why this particular species warrants being put on the list of threatened or endangered species.
I just didn't want somebody to think, coming out of this, that it literally is like everybody's favorite charismatic megafauna. Yeah. We get enough people to push for it, then it gets listed. That's not how this works.
That's a fair point.
No, that's true. That's true. Okay, so petition comes in, and the service has right up front, they have 90 days within reason. Sometimes takes them 6 years, but 90 days to take a look at this petition, the information in it, and say, is there enough in here to justify a deeper look. Is there enough here that would suggest, maybe this species is at risk and we should take a deeper look at it to see whether it truly warrants being listed or not. If it says no, that's it. That's the end of the process. It says non-substantive 90-day finding, not warranted. They actually just say non-substantive 90-day finding, and they don't have to do anything else, right? However, if they say
no, someone can take them to court and say, no, you didn't look at it right.
Yeah, but from a process standpoint, they're done. There's judicial review at pretty much every step in these processes, right?
We'll just cover that. We'll just say every step
you can get sued, right?
Okay.
But functionally, 90-day, nothing here, not enough information here to suggest that we can't make a determination if it's warranted or not. So that's it. Now, if there's enough information there that says, we should probably take a harder look. They have a total of 12 months to make this decision, not from the end of that 90 days. That 12 months applies back to the first day that the petition was submitted.
So another, 3/4 of the time.
So roughly, if it worked how it's supposed to work, they'd have an additional 9 months. Yep. And I say if it worked how it's supposed to work.
So give us an example of a species that was that had a negative 90-day finding, so where it was not listed after the 90-day finding.
So there are all sorts of them. So you've had multiple prairie dog species that they've actually been proposed for listing or petitioned and found non-substantive 90. Ironically enough, you've also had those same species petitioned and been warranted but precluded at times.
We'll get there.
You have at one point American bison was one that had been petitioned, and there was a non-substantive 90-day finding.
So that's great. So just
there's
a couple examples. There's a bunch of them.
Boatload of them. I mean, if you really went out and looked at them,
right?
There's a bunch of them that don't meet that first.
Somebody brought the animal to the doorstep, and the service said, no,
not enough here.
Yep.
Right, not enough here. Now that next step, so 12 months to review.
Once they've determined there's substantial information to warrant further review.
Right. Then they go to this review. Yeah. That 90-day window isn't ironclad. It doesn't say 90 must be done in 90 days. It's like a within reason, reasonableness kind of standard. Did you get it done in a reasonable amount of time? The 12-month standard, if they find that substantial at 90 day, that 12-month standard that's 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's not 12 months in a day, a week, a month. I mean, it's 12 months. Now there are piles again. And when I say piles, I'm talking hundreds of species where the service has not met that 12-month deadline to make a decision. And so what kind of decision do they have to make? They can make one of a few decisions, right? So they can, at 12 months, they can say, we've looked at everything, not warranted for listing. Or we've looked at everything, warranted for listing, and it's going to be listed as threatened. Warranted for listing, it could be listed as endangered. Now, threatened means it's at risk of becoming endangered within the foreseeable future. Endangered it's at risk of becoming extinct within the foreseeable future. Very different standards, although the Fish and Wildlife Service has applied those two. Once they're listed, they've treated those two basically the same. Functionally threatened or treated as endangered from a management standpoint.
Technically, there's this
distinction.
Yeah. What we do about things that impact the species after they're listed,
right?
Basically the same thing,
right? And so then there's another category, and it's the warranted for listing but precluded due to other more pressing priorities or other priorities. But
other priority,
it's not pressing. I'm adding words, but it's warranted but precluded due to other
for some
priorities.
other reason.
Not priorities. It's not a prioritization system. It's a system by which they basically say we can't get to it for administrative reasons or other things. It does not have to be tied to.
I use priority. Yeah. I use priority the wrong way.
Okay.
Right, but it's basically we have this workload, and we only have so many resources to address this workload.
We can't get to it.
Right.
We
it's physically cannot get to it.
It's not as if there's a different species more at risk, and we're going to get to that first.
Although,
under the Act.
That's technically true. Although, as you know, they have a regulatory structure as well for interpreting but precluded, and they do categorize them based on risk. And they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
They assign listing priority numbers based upon a number of factors, and one of those is risk.
Yep,
it's a significant factor that pushes it to a higher number.
Mm-hmm.
But
correct me if I'm wrong, don't other regulatory actions play into that as well? Other mechanisms that can be active on a species?
What do you mean?
I mean, state actions, or is there some role in there for, some other regulatory mechanism? If you say, no, this is, there's something else, working here to protect this species. And
states could come forward with their own plans to address the species, and that can ameliorate some of the threats and lowering sort of the risk factor.
Exactly.
So let's really quickly touch on what the service has to look at when they're making a decision whether or not to list a species, right? So I always just call it the 5-factor test. It's just because it's 5 factors. It's pretty easy. I thought hard about that.
I was going to say, I thought maybe you called it that because everybody else did and you heard it from someone else.
I always call it that because that's how I was taught it in the first place.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the 5-factor test. There are 5 listing criteria. There are only 5 things that the service looks at. Now, when you hear them, you'll think, well, there's about 1 million things they think at, but they fall into the 5 categories, right? So 1, present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of its habitat or range.
So habitat.
Yep. 2, overutilization for commercial, recreational, scientific, or educational purposes. So things like
pressure on these things.
Yeah. Hunting pressure, people pressure, pressure. Disease or predation. That's pretty self-explanatory. Inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms. What is in place already to try and make sure that this species is still here?
Yep.
Right? And then this is the catch-all. This brings everything into play. Other natural or man-made factors affecting its continued existence. So that basically says, here's the kitchen sink.
Right. Yep.
And that one's used a lot in litigation, right? That one is challenged a lot in litigation.
Yeah.
Did the service analyze everything in making its decision? But that's it. Those 5 things. That's what they look at, and they analyze it. And you only have to meet one of those 5 criteria. You don't have to meet all 5. If it's threatened with extinction, or if it's threatened with becoming endangered because of disease, that's all you have to do. You only have to meet one.
But it's a gradient, sort of a scale on any one of those 5. I mean, you can't just have a minimal amount. It's got to be so onerous or so bad in one of those 5 that it really warrants listing.
Right.
Because you can have a number of them that are sort of...
Well, you could have a cumulative impact.
You can, and they'll analyze
2 or 3 or 4 of those, and they'll analyze the cumulative impact of different threats. But really, theoretically, you could have 4 of these, no issue at all. And I can give you an example. Disease or predation. Here's a perfect example. White nose syndrome in long-eared bats.
Long-eared bats, yep.
So long-eared bats are found all over the country, something like 40 states. Maybe not quite that many. Maybe more than that. I can't remember. We're going to call it 40.
Okay.
Found all over the country. Right, their populations were just fine. Human development was really having no impact on them. They were doing just fine until this introduced fungus came into the U.S. And it was a vector for white nose syndrome in this bat, and it's almost always fatal. Almost always fatal. It was listed. That bat. That is embarrassing. That mammal. Oh man,
we
should edit that part out. I'm a biologist. I'm tired. That mammal. That's it. Disease. That was the only threat, and it was listed as threatened range wide because of that single threat.
Yeah, I mean there were other little things in there,
but not enough to list them.
Not enough to list them.
Independently.
There were destruction of their hibernacula. And others, development next to caves and things, but it didn't rise to that same level. That's a good point.
Absent disease, they wouldn't have been listed. So, and I can give you another example of other natural or man-made. Bearded seal. bearded seal in the Arctic, and particularly in Alaska for purposes of our act. Bearded seal was listed. And the sole threat, the singular identified threat for the continued existence of bearded seal. You want to guess?
Climate change.
You got it. But you knew that.
Yeah.
You know what when they listed them, so you have to say the likelihood of becoming threatened or endangered or extinct in the foreseeable future. And they defined foreseeable future. You want to guess what they defined? How they defined foreseeable future for bearded seal?
Man, I'm going to guess like 100 years.
Man, within 1 year of it, I think they actually said 99 years.
It's as if I knew.
Yeah, maybe you knew.
Hey,
maybe I picked a bad example. But the point is, they had climate models that suggested the ice habitat that bearded seals depended upon in 100 years was not going to exist anymore, and they listed bearded seal as a result of that, and only that, the result from climate change.
Yeah, and I think they also looked at non-habitat when they did that analysis too.
So for everyone, just to kind of back up to the beginning of these 5 factors, for anybody that thought that the 5 factors sounded like it was easy at the beginning, realize that these factors can become huge. These modeling processes, somebody who's done some of them can be enormously complex with so many variables that, like, really you're talking about a complex process for
if you read one of the decisions of the agency when they're going through an explanation of the 5 factors, it's 10-point font, single space, 3-column, 60 pages long.
Yeah, these are not.
This is not. That's just them digesting all of the volumes of information they have in front of them.
So for anybody that thinks, in 12 months, and then we'll go, on vacation, and then we'll go hunting and whatever else, and piece of cake. And remember, not only do you have to go through all this for each species, somebody just backed up their truck to your front door and dumped 300 of them out at once, and you have to deal with all of them.
Right. So and along with that, you have to deal with you have to deal with designating critical habitat at the same time, and you have to deal with putting together a recovery plan for that species to try and get them. I mean, we talked about at the beginning, recovery for purposes of delisting.
That's what the statute says they're supposed to do.
Right.
Does that happen?
So interesting. You should say that.
I can't even see his notes.
So and I don't even need the notes for this part. So from the recovery plan standpoint, only about, there are about 30% of all species that are listed as threatened or endangered that do not have a recovery plan in place. The median time frame to develop a recovery plan for a species is over 5 years.
The name should imply, but it's essentially the idea, what are we going to do to recover this species so that we don't have to list it anymore? And 30%, no one has thought ahead to say, this is how we're going to meet that objective.
Yeah, what's the path? What's the roadway? What are the markers?
They use and I don't want to disparage the service here, because for the longest time they actually, for the first 20 years, 25 years of the act, maybe even 30 years, the service was able to establish recovery plans for most species. They were always at near capacity, but once they're starting to get these petitions for 400 species and listing all of these species at a time and having resources diverted to addressing litigation and the settlements as a result of litigation, they get behind on the recovery planning process. They get behind on the critical habitat designation process.
Right.
And so now you have species like Canada lynx in Wyoming that's been listed since the early 2000s with no recovery plan in place. Yet the Forest Service, for example, will do their forest management plans. They'll have pieces of that plan that are meant to address lynx habitat, right? Because it's a listed species and you have critical habitat. In that instance, critical habitat has been designated, but there's no recovery plan in place. So that's a couple of the other things that they have to do. This is all talking on the listing side. Mm-hmm. How does the delisting side work?
We just back it in reverse.
Right? Isn't that what you're supposed to do?
Yeah, you got to look at the 5 factors again, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it takes a petition to delist, doesn't it?
It doesn't, but that's typically what it
requires. Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes prompting.
A lot of species actually have been delisted. Let me quantify. Not a lot of species have been delisted. Something like 54.
What's the percentage of that based on the total number?
It's between 2 and 3%, depending on whether you're looking at all species in the United States, all species globally, because you can list species internationally.
So for throwing up that flag of how awesome is it that, the Act is able to keep, 90-something% of species from going extinct. At the same time, we've only been able to get 3% back recovered.
Okay, I want to address that really quickly, though, because that is a constant. So you have one side of the aisle saying 99% recovery or 99% saved from extinction. Another side of the aisle saying, well, you have only recovered 2 to 3% of these species, so how can you say it's succeeding? I think you have to be pretty careful with that argument. I think you have to be careful with the saying it's prevented the extinction of 99%. That's really hyperbole on both sides, because at the end of the day, for example, bald eagles, right? Did the Endangered Species Act really recover bald eagles? That's put out there as
it's one of the shining examples
for how the Endangered Species Act works.
Of a species that came back.
But why did it come back? Was it because of the Endangered Species Act that it came back? Or was it because we discovered that DDT was killing a whole bunch of birds and we banned DDT? Right? And so we banned DDT and eagles bounce back and we get them recovered. But you know what? We still have the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act in place that in a lot of ways is more restrictive than the Endangered Species Act on what you can do with those birds. So you still have this overlying protection.
They're all going to be different, unique. There's going to be a scale of how much, different acts and the Endangered Species Act is going to come into play, but others are as well. Other protections from states and from federal protections and those things.
And the other thing is from a funding standpoint, you have more than a quarter of the species that are listed receive less than it's either $10,000. It's probably less than that, less than $10,000 a year from the federal government for recovery. So to say that the Endangered Species Act alone was the basis for preventing extinction all these years, there are places where it's helped. Free.
It's a big tool in that toolbox.
It's a tool, but to say that it's prevented the extinction of 99% of species, I think is being a little bit generous. On the flip side, from the recovery part, if you look at for species that have recovery plans in place, most of those species are meeting objectives and moving towards recovery. So it's in that regard, it's doing what it's supposed to. But like I said, you have 30% of species, which is about 500, by the way, about 500 species without a recovery plan in place. And for those species, you don't even know what recovery means,
right? Or
how to get there. So yeah, if you have a recovery plan in place, those plans are working, and you're moving towards delisting. But the other thing is there's a backlog in the Fish and Wildlife Service on the delisting side. There are actually several dozen species ready to come off the list right now that have met recovery objectives, and the Fish and Wildlife Service will tell you they're ready to come off the list right now. They don't have the ability to do that. They've been diverting all of their resources to addressing all these floods of petitions that have come in. That's where it's all going. So it's all dealing with the listing side, and species that are ready to come off can't get off the list.
No, and I don't know how. I know we're running long for a short one, but just so everybody understands, part of the challenge here is it's not enough just to throw resources at the agency, because if people, when they back that truck up to the door to drop those species off, if the goal is, and some might say it has been, to swamp the agency with so much work that they can't do their jobs, then
not just some have, by the way. The ones doing it have said that's their purpose.
Yeah. They're saying like, that's what we want to do. And so, that makes it really tough on an agency. The response to that isn't just give the agency a bigger checkbook. If our goal is to cause the agency to fail, if somebody's trying to do that, you have to ask yourself, are
you throwing good money after bad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to talk about next week, or not next week, but on part 3 of this. We're going to talk about that. Some of the reasons for the changes, what the changes are, some of the reasons for the proposed changes are, and that's a big piece of it. So you primed the pump perfectly for that discussion next time. Want to wrap up this discussion about delisting really quick, because we said same process to get them off the list, right? But I want to give you an example just to prepare you for our next discussion. Give you an example of how it's supposed to work and how it's actually worked. So Mike's right. It's supposed to work that
He's always right. I'm sick of it.
I know. I probably don't let that go to your head, but Mike, you're right.
It won't.
Yeah. The Act envisions the delisting process mirroring the listing process. It's supposed to be the same analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Grizzly Bears. I want to use that as an example to end this discussion today. When grizzly bears were listed in 1975, the Fish and Wildlife Service wrote its listing rule, the reasons justifying listing, the threats to the species, went through its 5-factor analysis and published that in the Federal Register. And it was 3 pages long. I just want that to set in for a second, because when I tell you what the delisting process is
just to be clear, by today's standards, the introduction is got to be at least 3 pages long.
The executive summary will be
right.
3 pages long. Right. So today, and I can't tell you exactly how many pages it is. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you it's more than 50 for that rule. I can tell you that in addition to that rule, it required a conservation strategy, which was the management strategy for conserving grizzly bears for maintaining population.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It recovered individual state management plans from the 3 states that had the listed population that was going to be delisted. It required a regulatory framework from the states on how each state would pursue a hunting season if it chose to have a hunting season. It required an agreement among the states on how they would allocate discretionary mortality of the grizzly bears among the 3 states. And it required that conservation strategy. It required unanimous approval of the conservation strategy in order to get to the point where the service would then consider moving forward with a delisting rule.
Yeah. So they had to go through a lot of hoops, and there's been a lot of time and money, millions of dollars on this,
and somewhere between 700 and 1,000 pages of documents of the listing rule and accompanying documents it relied upon in order to delist, to deal with the threats piece, that 5-factor analysis.
Right.
And now that's 44 years after we had 3-page document.
I can't wait for the next episode.
So I just want to leave it there because we're going to talk about some of the changes, and some of the proposed changes are directly related to some of these things we've talked about today. We haven't even talked about what harm means in the Act, what it means to harm a species. Mm-hmm. We haven't even talked about how the Act applies on private land versus federal land.
Or how they can list a significant portion of the range as opposed to just everywhere the species was historically found.
Right. We haven't talked about experimental populations or experimental non-essential populations and how those have worked.
Right.
I mean, we haven't talked about 4D rules. We haven't talked about
10J rules.
A lot of wonky stuff.
But my point is, we've spent about 40 minutes with you here, and we've just scraped the surface of how this Act operates. And we just kind of hit the high points, so you know how the listing and delisting works. But there's so much more to this. And like I said last time, take my class and you'll find out more of how this works. But next time we're going to talk about what are some of the challenges with how this works. What has arisen out of this that have been challenges to implementing the Act the way Congress intended it that it be implemented, that makes funding it challenging. Funding it the right way challenging, and makes the outcomes of recovery difficult to achieve, and the types of things that Congress and the administration are proposing to fix those, and whether they're good ideas or not. We'll talk about them.
Okay.
So, was that too wonky, Nephi?
No, I thought it was. I don't think so. I think it's, and now I'll spend 10 minutes telling you why I don't think so. Just kidding. I'm looking forward to the next one. I thought it was great, and I think if you guys, here's a promise for you guys. Leave us comments. You send us drop a note on Facebook. Send us a comment and tell us what you want more of, what you want less of. And I promise, even my bad jokes, if you send enough comments telling them to quit, they will.
That's true. Well, I don't know about that, but we'll try.
Send your comments.
Please send your comments about Nephi in. Just kidding.
Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want to know.
And if you have ideas for how you want to get this information, we'll write about it. We'll talk about it. We'll do videos about it. Whatever you want. We want to make sure that you're informed and that you know about these decisions that are impacting your land, your water, and your wildlife. We want you to know about your mountain. Thanks for joining us. See you for part 3.
Mike here from the Your Mountain podcast. We need a favor. Go on our website, itsyourmountain.com, and find the links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so that you can like and follow us, and also so that you can share us with your friends. Wherever you got this podcast from, go ahead and click subscribe, rate us, and leave a comment. These simple things will really help us get the word out. That's itsyourmountain.com. Thanks for the help.